Well, thanks for coming. This is a panel about content and brand marketing around content. So just to kind of introduce a little bit of the evolution of cannabis business. So we've seen an evolution from products, right? This is a product, this does this thing, to starting to evolve into brands and what the difference is, right? A product does something, a brand is something, and it's something that provides more than just an outcome. We've also seen evolution from cannabis going to this is how many milligrams it has, and this is how effed up it will get you, and it's the best. And now we're in the middle of this sort of, this is what it does, this is the outcome. It makes you feel sleepy, it makes you feel tired, or it makes you feel awake or relaxed. And then again, starting to move even further and again, get into a brand. And so the point of this is to understand, you know, if you're building a cannabis brand, if you're in the cannabis business, really, you need to understand who your consumer is. What category are you in? Are you going to be a nutraceutical, CPG, pharmaceutical, technology? And then taking all that data, understanding what your brand is, what your aspirations are, who your audience is, and then understanding how content can help build, tell your story, and actually effectively help you market. So I want everyone to introduce themselves, and see, there you go.
Hey guys. My name is Dae Lim. I am the co-founder and the designer at Sunday School. Sunday School is a cannabis lifestyle brand. We make apparel and accessories for the high-minded people, and we are really excited to be jumping into products, and I'm really honored to be in panel with you guys.
My name is Brandon Lachey, and I am a blogger, a model, and the host of Pop Pie, which is one of the best shows, I'd say, on prohibited media.
Hi, I'm Jesse McKeel. I'm the senior producer at Prohibited, overseeing all of our original content. So when you head to prohibited.com, you go ahead, click on the videos. That's what I'm working on.
And I'm Gary Bryman. I'm the executive producer of Rocket Content. Rocket Content is a video-on-demand production company doing anything from live streams to branded content to commercials. If you got something made, we will knock it out the park for you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Yeah, so the purpose today is to sort of discover and understand, you know, there's tons of different content, right? It fits into different categories. Some content's great at brand awareness. Some content is going to be needed for investor relations. Some content's good to try and drive sales. But there isn't, you know, the order of content that you're creating and what you're doing is really going to be specific to your brand and what it is that you want to accomplish. So I'd like to start with Brandon. So, you know, Brandon has a lot of experience being a content creator, being an influencer and influencer marketing and all that fun stuff. Yeah, it is strange. But talk a little bit about, you know, some of the benefits and challenges of influencer marketing, and it's something that in the cannabis space, knowing that most cannabis companies cannot buy media, they cannot buy advertisements, they heavily rely on platforms like influencers who can sort of consume and show it. So talk about it.
Well, I feel like basically with cannabis marketing, honestly, it's one of the hardest things to market because you cannot just post, you know, anything on your social as far as Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. There are very, very specific ramifications of how you can post. So everything you post, nothing can be a direct sale of your product. So I feel like figuring out a way of creating sort of a lifestyle around your brand and making it so that, you know, your audience is captivated and wants to sort of be like the person that is posting is the most important thing. I think it's like 54% of women actually go to Instagram for sale or deciding if they want to buy something. And 31% of consumers actually only use the internet instead of using like a phone to pick up and call for information about a brand. So building your content is, I would say, the #1 key in keeping an engagement very high. I find that it's honestly really hard to figure out exactly what you are trying to sell when it comes to cannabis and how to brand yourself. I work with a brand called Stony Delivery, and we are a delivery service and we sell all across California. And we recently just got our Instagram actually shut down because of a post. So.
And what was the post that you guys even did, right?
No, we actually weren't the people who posted it. Someone else posted a direct sale, posting a sale code on their Instagram and then tagged ours, and it directly wiped us out, and Instagram was like, no more, you guys are gone. So now we lost our entire page. So everything you post when you're a cannabis brand, it has to be very, very curated and sale driven without actually selling a product.
Well, that's great, right? So I mean, it's not great that that happened, but it's great to understand sort of the world that we live in. It's in terms of content. So, you know, Day has a fashion brand, and what I think is fascinating about fashion and how it applies to cannabis, besides the fact that it's a cannabis lifestyle fashion brand, is that when you're building a fashion brand, you can't just do marketing like click to buy. It's not like, I'm going to make this ad and there's going to be an immediate ROI. I'm going to sell this much product from the ad. It's the opposite, right? You're creating affinity, you're creating aspirational desires and lifestyle and discovery. So talk a little bit about that, and talk about maybe how there's some you know, influence and content and how that all matches to help you make money selling fashion.
Yeah, so we started out as a t-shirt and a sweatshirt, like a streetwear brand, and we branded it as like a smokewear, so that we have like convenient pockets to stash your joints. We have like smell-proof pockets on our jackets, etc. So, you know, it was a very kind of like a quote-unquote gimmicky thing. But for us, you know, exactly as you said, it was about, okay, what does a modern-day stoner dress like? And that's the problem statement that we started with. And then basically, you know, I'm an immigrant from Seoul, Korea. So drawing from my influences and my co-founder's influences of, you know, Korean clothing, Korean culture, we integrated that with like the high lifestyle and started producing content. And, you know, at the core of our brand is kind of irreverence, right? Because we're catering towards, you know, the millennial stoners, etc. And we made a lookbook. Our first ever lookbook was called The Genesis. And our brand is called Sunday School, but Sunday with like ice cream sundae instead of like the religious Sunday school. And we did a lot of pot puns. We did a whole pun on it where God is high every single day for 7 days and creates the world. So like on day one, it's all actual biblical quotes, like day one, let there be light. And it's like a picture of this Asian boy smoking a joint. And it's all just visual association. And you know, I've not been at this for such a long time. It's been a year and a half. But one thing that I've learned is that in terms of branding, it's just all about being consistent with your messaging as well as your like visual. So your logo lockup is always there, whatever content you spread out through. But besides like those basic learnings, especially as we're, you know, preparing to get into the cannabis space, the regulations on direct ROI related marketing is, you know, very vague, and it's something that isn't really easy to measure. So, you know, we were just talking quickly before this panel, but what's really important is having some patience to think how long the returns can realize over. So instead of like a quick e-commerce, you know, ROA on Facebook ad spends, it's more about how do we play this game of million impressions or this game of, you know, 100,000 meaningful impressions and get the community going that support your brand's lifestyle.
That's great. Yeah. So each brand is going to have different needs, not only based on what the brand does, what category it's in, but where you are in the life cycle of your brand. Are you a startup and you need to communicate to investors, or are you focused on business to business because you're a technology platform? Do you have to educate, you know, bud tenders because they're the gatekeeper to your consumers, and then at that point you still have to educate consumers as well, because if they have never heard of your brand, even if the bud tender says this is great, but they've seen that, but they're gonna be like, yeah, I want to try this. So it's again, it's multifaceted, and within all of this is the challenge of not being able to legally place ads, even in California where it's recreational and we have adult use. You can't do those things. So Jesse runs original content, creates a lot of original content. So what's great about that, right, is you can create original content that has an audience that may sort of match up with the audience that, say, a brand is looking to market to, and then you have the ability to sort of integrate brands into, you know, in an evergreen content. So talk a little bit about that and that process.
Yeah, so when I came on with Rob V, our creative director, our goal was to really stop doing the very this plus weed format of content, which I think is, you know, pretty familiar to everyone in here. We wanted everything to feel natural. You know, if you're watching alcohol commercials, is a great thing we try to look at, or any alcohol integration, is like you're selling a lifestyle. You're selling something aspirational, like Josh said. We're trying to create content that feels like whatever your brand is. So like, pot pie is a perfect show because it is hanging out with your friends. Like it's cooking with your friends. It's being silly. It's having fun. You're getting a good cooking lesson, but you're also getting high with your friends. So, there's shows like that, but there's also shows like, The Modern Growers, which is, our show that kind of follows the brand partners we work with. Like if we go visit their sites and learn about what they're producing. And so that's a little more infotainment. It feels like a documentary series, like something you might watch on Netflix or something. It's much more informative, but still is showing what the brand is as opposed to just a standard commercial.
Right, and so talking about standard commercials, there is going to be a time when cannabis brands are going to be able to market and generate ads and sort of do that. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions in the cannabis marketplace because there's a lot of startups and there's a lot of entrepreneurs about like what is an ad and what is its goal. And people, again, we hear it all the time because we work with a lot of brands. Where's the ROI? When is the ROI going to hit? Like why can't I just do an ad? And so if you think about some of the biggest ads that you've ever heard of, they almost never talk about, especially in the CPG world, right? This is what it does, this is how it tastes, and this is how much it is. It's creating aspiration, it's creating, you're discovering the brand values, you're learning about it. And so great advertisements are actually telling little mini stories in 30 seconds. So Gary's got 22 years of background and experience in doing, working with tons of brands. And, you were part of, I don't know if, some of us old timers remember Terry Tate, office linebacker, but Gary was, one of the teams behind that great ad campaign. So maybe tell us a little bit about that because, ironically, it's like Terry Tate for the brand. It had nothing to do with the NFL. Had nothing to, so what was the point? Like, why would they go into that direction?
It was the turn of the century, and the content was all fresh back then. But you're exactly right. When a brand's trying to connect with an audience, the question is, make me feel something. What is the emotional response that I'm going to get when I watch your 30-second or your 60-second? And if the answer is nothing, then it's not a great ad. The reality is there's a lot of not great ads, but if you see them enough, they're going to make the impressions, and eventually you're going to have that subconscious become a conscious reaction, and next thing you know, you're ordering, that beer at the bar because of the natural response. What I think is so exciting about the current place that we're currently finding ourselves in, and knowing all of the product and all of the companies that are sort of emerging on the scene, it's going to become inevitable that they're going to need to figure out a way to differentiate themselves from each other, which is the goal of all products, whether it's cannabis-based or not. And then it's really coming up with that marketing approach and knowing who your insight is and knowing who your audience is. But it's the same principles that have been, effectively used, since the beginning of television and soap, selling the soap in the breaks between the soap operas, that we're just going to sort of take and put into, this new demographic and market.
Yeah, it's great, right? So like if you have a cannabis brand and your marketing plan is to tell people what it does, how many milligrams it has, and what it makes you feel, to be perfectly candid, you're not going to be in the market very long, okay? Because guess what? Every single other person in the space can market on those same factors. You cannot be marketing based on the effects of what the brand or the product does. Now, as a perfect example, think about Red Bull and 5-Hour Energy. The end result, besides heartburn and being stressed out and feeling like you have a heart attack, you can tell I don't drink it, is that they pretty much do the same thing, right? So Red Bull, though, spends $600 million a year creating content. They don't really create ads. In fact, the ads they create, Red Bull Gives You Wings, represent 10% of their media mix, and the rest of it is original lifestyle content. They do not tell you how many milligrams of caffeine it is in it. They do not tell you even really what the purpose is, at least specifically from the brand and content side. They're just selling you a lifestyle, and it's effing cool. 5-Hour Energy drink is on the opposite end of it. It literally tells you on the bottle what it is. It's 5-Hour Energy, not 4-hour, not 6 hours, it's 5-Hour Energy. And so all of the marketing around that is telling you what it is. So at the end of the day, you could sit there and say they're the same end result, but the way that they approach it is drastically different. So looking at that, these are brands that understand who they are, and they understand how to use content effectively based on what category they sit in, who their consumers are, and what they're tackling. So Dave, maybe go in a little bit about talking about, how do you measure success and ROI in content, especially for fashion, when it's very little like the first time you see a piece of fashion, no one's going to click on, buy it, and ship it to their home, right?
So for us, we have two different businesses currently, which is like the e-commerce business, which ROA is very easy to track. You spend this much on different channels, whether it be like, experiential, whether it be content, and you know how much you're making out of it. But we also have a big wholesale channel, which not dissimilar to cannabis companies. We don't have to go through distributors, but it's all about the impression, it's all about the brand, whatever that means. So as we were thinking about this, we were like, what makes a good brand? And I really think it's two things. One is consistency, and two is the stories and the narratives, whether it's single-layered narratives or multi-layered narratives. But again, like how often you engage them with new narratives that they can buy into that lifestyle of. So, as we were thinking about that, we were just mentioning the Genesis lookbook that we did. That, our first season sales were negligible. But a year later, from that, we got featured on Vogue, on The Times, on Hypebeast, et cetera, like all these new millennial channels. Prohibited most recently, and from then on, a year later, Aurora Cannabis, Canopy Growth, all these, we supply to Barney's opening ceremony, so those sort of accounts are more familiar to us. But now these huge new cannabis corporations don't know, really, well, I can't say that, but they are spending a lot of money with their new capital, especially on consumer side marketing, and they hit us up and cleared out our inventory. And I asked them, how did you hear about us? Like, what led you to discover us? And they were like, well, we started kind of seeing your presence on Instagram, and then I remember reading a Vogue article about you guys a long time before, and basically, and the stuff that we did a year ago, realizing now, that just kind of didn't really make sense to me. But I think it's all about omnichannel, as you said. When you first go into a dispensary, keep in mind, for a lot of the kids, and by kids I mean 21 plus, a lot of dispensary is something very new for them, right? I live in New York, and a lot of the old gray market, black market economies still haven't fully taken over. And they don't know what to expect when they go into this new point of sale, right? So being able to, capture their attention in the 30 seconds, whether it's through ads, whether it's your products, and being able to get the exact sense, or at least the feeling of what the brand is about, I think is very crucial.
Yeah, so you bring up a good point. You're talking about omni-channel, which essentially means you're not just focused on just Instagram or just Facebook. You're trying to do a media mix, reaching all of your audience, your target audience, across a variety of different mediums. Video, maybe it's print, billboard, radio ad, whatever you can do, knowing the limitations of cannabis. A big part of it right now is events, right? So everyone does know events, you're going to reach a small amount of people, but they're going to be able to touch your product, experience it, and it's been actually very effective for cannabis brands. Events still have a pretty decent ROI. So talk a little bit about events and how events and content can potentially mix, especially through social media.
Yeah, I think also social media, as I was saying, like what you're doing with creating content through social media is you are creating an aspirational dream, essentially. So when you're picking a content creator or an influencer, you're looking for someone who's going to be able to sell a lifestyle. And so with cannabis brands and a lot of brands, there's no interpersonal connection, because a lot of the work you do is online. And if you're a cannabis brand, you don't have a store necessarily. You send your stuff to a dispensary, and then that dispensary is actually who's representing your brand, not you. So I feel like with cannabis brands, it's really important to actually host or be a part of or sponsor large parties or things that are in your local area, because that person-to-person interaction, it goes beyond anything that you're going to get on the internet. We just hosted an event for Stony delivery service, and we sponsored a cannabis launch party for the first co-work space. And it was the first party that we actually were present in an event. And the amount of articles and people talking about us and photos that are getting passed around the internet that we get tagged in that we don't even have any idea. It's free promotion. And it's the cheapest way you can do it. And it's more authentic than having an influencer slap a hashtag ad on your brand.
We were just at Stanford doing like a panel with the business school students there, and we interviewed 45 kids over 21, and yeah, not exactly kids. And we were like, okay, so in this new era, like when you go into a dispensary, let's say you don't know a single brand, what do you do? And then so we wrote out like, you know, basically they do this. They search the brand on Instagram. They Google the brand, or 3, they look at, you know, the people that they trust, whether it's their friends or influencers, and see if they follow them and remember it from like the previous experiences. And we asked them to rank out of those, what's the most important to you? And it was really about like having that first-hand or second-hand experience about the brand that really set that brand apart, and then they would use Instagram and Google as ancillary research, and we found that really interesting.
Yeah, well, so you have a generational way. You know, different generations are discovering brands in different ways. So my generation, it was a lot more passive experience. You kind of turn it on. You're forced to watch television. You know, the ads. There was no TiVo or whatever. You know, and there certainly wasn't a Netflix. So you were. It was a very passive experience. You were just force fed, and over repetition, you know, share of voice and just frequency, you eventually became, you know, aware of what the brand was and what the lifestyle attributes are. And that is absolutely not how millennials and other the younger generations are discovering any brand. And that's the other thing, is that they are not making different purchase habits just because it's cannabis. Period. They're not. So if someone's purchasing a soft drink and an alcoholic beverage and wine and clothing or whatever, and their discovery and what they care about and what influences their purchase decisions are X, Y, and Z, and whatever that is for that demographic, it's going to absolutely apply the same way to cannabis. And so, again, going into it informed, understanding that. A little bit more into the event side, because it's super effective. You know, Gary just did a big event. You were at E3, which is kind of, you know, that's where we all believe that these events are going to grow to in the future. You're a mix of consumer and professional and just over the top and sort of fun stuff. So how does content play a role in something like E3, where there's so much noise, there's so many brands, and how does a brand sort of be in that crazy of a space and get something out of it, get an ROI?
You know, it's like we were talking about, it's an experiential purpose that you're going to have, and not everyone's going to be able to attend E3. Actually, the majority of the people that want to know what's going on at E3 aren't at E3. So it becomes making content that can then be shared socially. And when your friend tells you something's cool and you have that sense of discovery, it's cool. It's much cooler than being told, hey, this is cool because spokesperson X tells me it's cool. So you can't undervalue what it means to get that first connection, sort of discovery element going into it. And so if you can craft stories, content, BTS, and then have it be in bite-sized, shareable segments, then it becomes hopefully a viral, shareable thing.
So Jesse, you were at Legendary Digital before, right? And so a big part of their content mix was the event space. And the reason I'm bringing up other brands is just to kind of, cannabis is new. So what can we learn from existing brands and other markets that are operating and having success? So, looking at Legendary, how important were events to a content platform and the brands that were partnered there? And maybe tell a little bit of background on Legendary if people don't know who it is.
So Legendary has Legendary Pictures, you probably know from Godzilla, Batman, the recent Batman movies, has a digital division that owns Chris Hardwick's company Nerdist and Geek and Sundry and Amy Poehler Smart Girls. I actually was meeting with an old friend from one of their shows, just this show called Critical Role, and it's a Dungeons and Dragons based show. And we were talking about like how there's interesting parallels with how the RPG, the role-playing game business, it kind of parallels in how we do content how they do content to sell like little action figures and how we do content to sell cannabis. And it was really interesting because, you know, they don't stop the show to go buy this figure. You know, they're creating content, a lifestyle of being a gamer, and like events have been were really interesting when we do parties, because it was not only a way to get like to meet other people in the community, but there were also really like I was thinking about, like we had Kraken Rum was a sponsor of the event, and we would do really interesting content, like comedic content, because that was what really worked with our audience. So it was integrating Kraken into this gamer nerd world, like, you know, with cool Kraken octopus pirate stuff. Like it kind of fit their brand kind of fit into the stories that we were telling in our content, as opposed to just, you know, plopping down a bottle of Kraken rum during the show and saying like, buy this product. Yeah, I think that pretty much sums it
Yeah,
up.
I mean, yeah. So I think the idea is knowing who. Again, you're kind of hearing me repeat the same things, right? Knowing who your audience is. Who is your audience? Who are you selling to? What do they already care about? Where are they? And then how do you take what your brand is and your product and then deliver it to them? If you are a nutraceutical brand, that's great. You're going to create content that's going to talk about your efficacy and the quality and the consistent outcomes. If you are a lifestyle brand and you want to really tackle the adult use or the rec market, you're going to have to weigh different things. It's going to be, you know, brand awareness and discovery and shared values, et cetera. So, you know, all of this stuff is driven by data. You know, data is super, super important. So, you talk about how, you know, you are making clothing not just for cannabis consumers, but for Korean cannabis consumers, which I know a little bit about. In South Korea, cannabis is still a pretty taboo subject, right? Yeah. So you have a very niche market. Yeah. So talk a little bit about how did you get data on this market? I mean, you live it, but was data still an important part about creating the brand and understanding what your consumers want?
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, for us, I come from like a very engineering background. I studied math in school. All this, exactly. And, you know, for us, before I started Sunday school, I was working at McKinsey, which is a management consulting firm. And the most important thing about, you know, the different consumer projects that I've worked on is knowing your audience and getting insights on them, which is not easy. Getting insights on your audience is very, very difficult. And then taking, you know, the right actions. What are the implications of their interests, right? So for us, you know, when we first started Sunday school, we made it so, you know, especially when we first launched the brand, we made it so we ran a lot of promotions, such as like free shipping, 20% discounts, to get information about who our customers are. And what we realized is, obviously, because it has like, you know, Korean heritage roots from my background, a lot of Asian and Asian American consumers really enjoyed our clothing and the messaging that we were sending through. So, you know, from then on, we kind of started doubling down on that, you know, as we developed our clothes and we started making grinders, we started making rolling papers, all these smoking accessories. We started, you know, just building our audience. And, you know, we're not big. We only get like 100,000 hits on our website. But, you know, even from them, you know, Google Analytics is your best friend, and they tell you which locations, which for us it's New York and California, New York and LA, and what sort of ethnicity that they're part of. So it's all these tools that, you know, give you some baseline, and you can use those baselines to contact your customers directly and give them incentives to tell them more about yourself, so that you can extrapolate that data and figure out where to go next. So as we are, our cannabis products are launching very soon, but, you know, as we were trying to think about what audiences do we want to serve first, for us, you know, we've done, you know, we've created a lot of content and a lot of merchandise for these Asian American consumers, and we wanted to make products for them, especially like the new millennial, calculator hitting, but also weed smoking Asian stoners.
And I got a question. When you were initially starting, where was the first place that you were going? Was it online? What was your initial?
Yeah, it was all e-commerce, which is, you know, the best way to start. Even before we started, which is what we are doing with our cannabis brand now, even before we start, we had landing pages. We had multiple landing pages where we tested different messaging, and we A/B tested the shit out of it. And we are about to get into that process now with cannabis. And since then, the retailers have picked us up, but it really took a year for us. We had to, and we weren't even making a lot of SKUs, so we had to create different content with the same exact item. So it's like, we have a series called High in Places. And it's just about doing different activities when you're high in different places. And it ranges from a shitty iPhone video to like a full-on production, which we had during New York Fashion Week. And it's just all about, it can look different, but if the central messaging is the same, I think that is, that adds to your consistency.
Yeah, I think repurposing your content is a huge thing too. So if you're going to do a photo shoot, think about like exactly how you were saying. You can do, a photo shoot, and then in that same shoot, use the same content to actually put out moving videos or whatever it is. So figuring out a way to maximize your time and repurposing your content is huge.
And because of Omnichannel, because of Omnichannel, now if you make a moving GIF, you can use that for your email marketing, and you can use it for social. You can use it for email marketing 3 months later, because chances are most people didn't open your email.
That's great. Yeah. So we again, the idea here is you have a brand. You don't have a product. You do not have something that does something to consumers. And so from a content marketing opportunity and from storytelling, you can't. Your goal should not be to educate your consumers on what your product does. That honestly, you've lost. Yeah. Because now, if you're pharma, that's great, and then, but think about Cialis versus Viagra, right? They different color tones. One is about sort of older men at sports and all the euphemisms in Viagra, and the other one's about couples holding hands and blah blah blah. So even though they kind of have the same outcome, they can't really talk about the outcome. They can't really talk about the specifics. It's very vague, but they have a very different path. And so, in crowded market spaces, you have to be great storytellers. You cannot just rely on hoping that because you're the best, or you have the best product, or your competitors suck, or you're giving this outcome that's going to help you win. So talk a little bit, maybe Jesse, go in a little bit about like original content. Talk a little bit about branded content. How does sort of branded content differ from original brand integration or sponsored content, and how does that work with brands?
Yeah. So like just to differentiate, original content is like our, when I say our, Prohibited's telling stories with our shows that you identify with, and we make you a part of that. Branded content is really an opportunity for to tell your own story with the production support and of a production company, but also with the platform. So Prohibited as an example, like if we would help you define that story, what you're trying to tell, come up with an original content piece together, we would help you create it, and then that would reach our network of audience, as opposed to trying to do it yourself and release it through your maybe limited social platforms. You're reaching a wider network. So that's the opportunity for branded content, is to reach a larger network while having the resources of storytellers, as opposed to trying to do it all on your own.
That's great. So a couple things. If we're going to look into the future of content for cannabis brands, you absolutely are going to have to look at tobacco and alcohol, because we are a regulated product, and the day that we are federally legal is the next day we are going to be the most heavily regulated product in the country. And so what that means is, how do beer brands, for instance, what can they do, what can't they do? Well, no alcohol brand can show actual consumption in an ad. You'll never see someone actually drinking a beer. You think they do, but they don't. They play pool around it. They put it in there. Maybe it's the Corona and there's a silhouette. It's all over. The beer is there, but the consumption of it's not allowed. So we talk to brands all the time, and we need to see bigger clouds. We want to see people take huge hits. We want to all of these details, and we want to see consumption. And again, you can't do that. I mean, you can do it for now, but again, let's think of the future. Like, think about and then use those limitations and opportunities to tell bigger stories. So you love the big cloud, you're all with it. Yeah, everyone wants big clouds. But so within the limitations, there's opportunities, and I think maybe talk a little bit about if you guys want to go into some of the social content stuff, and then we can start taking the questions soon. But yeah.
I just feel like with social media, it's extremely hard to market your cannabis brand, and finding the right niche of how you're going to do it, it means everything. And creating a really beautiful story, like it says a lot, because it takes away from the stigma of just weed being we're all stoners and we're lazy and we're this, and it's like it's taking it to a new level, and like the world is our oyster, and you can be absolutely creative and make magical content for your cannabis brand in this space that we have now.
It's also so challenging now because each social media platform has its own style, well, not its own regulations, but also its own style. Like you think about Instagram pages, the most successful Instagram pages have a strong aesthetic throughout the whole thing. If you're a photographer, all your photos have the same color palettes, and that's what's working on Instagram. What's working on Twitter is comedy, like short
Shit posts.
Like memes, like that kind of stuff. So that's also another challenge, is how do you tell your story and your voice with all of these restrictions on platform?
I think that the only way to really figure it out is honestly through trial and error, right? You could benchmark all you want, but like for us, like our most ever liked photo on Instagram is like a nipple ring with like a Balenciaga joint, like like Balenciaga name card joint on it, and that just like 20,000 people liked it, and 20,000 people follow us. So it must have gone, I guess, viral. But again, we had no idea, and that's not the regular shit we post. But we're like, oh, okay, so maybe there are some horny stoners here, right? Like, and that it's an evolution that is based on trial and error.
So I want to also talk a little bit. So again, when we're talking about brands, we're talking about products, we're going to talk about outcomes. How do you tell a story in a crowded space? There are 72,000 cannabis brands right now in the United States and Canada. Think about that. And you probably can name 5 off the top of your head, maybe 20 if you're in the business. So how do you tell a great story in a sea of people who are competing, saying, we give you the same outcome, we give you the same effects, we're the best. Quick story. So Dos Equis. Dos Equis was this little beer out of Mexico. It was in a crowded space. 270 beer brands were marketing and spending $1.5 billion a year on ads. So think about that. 270 brands, $1.5 billion a year spending on ads, and Dos Equis was way down there. No one cared. And the first thing is they looked at the data. Who do they want to market to? Who are their consumers? Their consumers were on average drinking 7 different beers a month. So their ideal consumer was someone who didn't have brand loyalty, who wasn't into craft beer, and who didn't really drink beer all that often. And so they sort of took that and they ran with it, and then they created the world's most interesting man, who doesn't always drink beer, but when he does, he prefers Dos Equis. He's even telling you that he doesn't have to even drink Dos Equis when he wants beer, because that's who their customers were. So it's super aspirational, right? Didn't tell you what it tasted like, didn't tell you what the alcohol content was, didn't say less filling, none of that shit. They didn't care. It wasn't about the product at all. And 20% increase in sales the first year. And they spent $50 million marketing it. So the reason I tell this story is, as cannabis brands, we have to evolve. We have to embrace storytelling. We have to embrace content. We have to look at where it's going to be in the future. And I think we're going to have to really understand that to tell great stories, it's going to have to combine data, knowing who your customers are, having a niche, looking at your competitors. What market are you in? Are you going to be a lifestyle brand? Are you going to be a nutraceutical? Are you going to be a pharmaceutical? Are you a technology platform? And taking all of that into account, and then trial and error, consistency, events, omnichannel, which means a media mix and everything else. So there you go. Bam. I think we're a little early, but we can take some questions if there are any from the audience. Yes, sir.
Facebook announced yesterday that they would allow verified businesses to be found in searches on Facebook. I wonder what you think how that will change.
Yeah, so for a while they did what's called shadow banning, and they didn't necessarily shut you down, but with search, the idea was that even if you were searching for something, they wouldn't reveal that. So you have experience, right?
I mean, I don't really know much about like that. I didn't know that was a thing actually on Facebook. I feel like I think everything is going to change slowly but surely, but as Josh was saying, like with the legalization of cannabis, it's going to be more strict, and it's just like the alcohol industry. You don't see anybody actually indulging in the product. So everything's going to change, and it's changing one day at a time, and it's just important to stay true to your brand and kind of stay one step ahead of the curve, you know?
Yeah, and I would also say that the limitations are actually opportunities. It's like when we first started, even though we were media, we couldn't, we got shut down after the first ad. This was almost 5 years ago, and across all channels. And that totally changed our outlook on how are we going to create content, what type of content we're going to create, and where are we going to find audiences. And those limitations led us to become have 18 different platforms and have distributed content across all of them, and even influence the type of content we're creating. And so those channels are opening back up, which is great. But Facebook is, it's a deal with the devil, right? I mean, you start getting addicted to those Facebook users, and you start spending money there, and then they change the algorithm. And by the way, they said that this week, and maybe next week they'll decide to change their mind again.
But I do think that there is a huge opportunity with digital in terms of brand awareness, right? For us, what's great is that because, we are, the fashion entity is there, and we have no limitations with marketing. So we can just, shoot out whatever we want, unless we can't directly sell what's not our company's.
It's still very strict though. Like I tried to promote an episode of Pot Pie, and we're not selling anything at all. It's just a show, and they denied my ad. So it really, it's all up in the air, and you never really know what's going to be taken down. You never really know. Really what it is that if 10 people flag your post, Instagram's going to see it, and then they're going to take it down. So you kind of don't even have any say, or you don't have any parameters. It's the viewer, it's Instagram, it's kind of out of your hands.
Yeah, they're always just being cautious, I think, they maybe don't know where they're going to lie the next day, but they're always going to err on the side of caution, so it doesn't always benefit us.
But as a marketer of product, you want to go where the audience is. So the minute that platform does open up, and the minute we do have an opportunity to go there, trust me, it's going to be a watershed moment. Because if the eyeballs are there, and your audience is ready to receive what you're trying to get out there, the story or the idea that you're trying to push along, it's just common sense that you want to go where the eyes are.
And Jesse brought up a good point too. It's tough because you kind of have to pick your poison. Making one piece of content to fix all formats is a lot of times means you're going to fail, because how people consume content on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and YouTube is different. Who's consuming that content and what that content, the format, how it needs to look. IGTV versus stories versus a post. You have one channel, Instagram, that has 3 different formats. And we don't even know if IGTV works or not. It technically works, but we don't know if anyone cares or is watching it. And sometimes you go on and everyone's doing it this way, and this is how you watch it. And sometimes I go on and people are actually thinking that you're going to flip it and watch it like it's a TV show because it's called IGTV or whatever.
Yeah, I think that comes into figuring out how to multi-purpose your content. So if you're making, let's say, if I post, let's say, an article that is news about the cannabis industry, I'm then going to take that same information, I'm going to post a fun photo on my Instagram and use a quote from that same article. So it's figuring out how to blend them all, but using the right content for each channel.
Any other questions? Yeah.
So I create content for disc golf, and if you know anything about that sport, the cannabis market and the disc golfer market is the same exact demographic.
Well, it's fair to say that all disc golfers smoke cannabis, but not all cannabis consumers play disc golf. Is that a fair statement?
We've also dealt with a lot of destigmatization and stereotypes and things like that. So I wanted to ask, and kind of going on Jesse's, because you were talking about legendary and cracking within the role playing. If I want to create crossover content, how is the best way to kind of approach creators in the cannabis market with disc golf and say, how do we tell the real story behind here that's free of all stereotypes and jokes and is interesting to those markets?
Are there influencers in the disc golf space?
Sure. Let's say the biggest Instagram influencers are the pros themselves.
Right.
They're getting towards the 100,000 subscriber mark.
Because the approach at Prohibited and at Legendary Digital was always talent first. we call them influencers depending on where they are, but you know, talent really is a great vehicle to tell stories because they're a person, they're a personality, and people want to be like them. So I think finding those people that in the disc golf world that people relate to and aspire to is that endpoint, you know, is the endpoint for good content. Like the good content follows. Like we really like to approach a lot of our content by first bringing talent in and discussing it with them and finding it with them, as opposed to just we come up with a show and tack someone on, because that way we get original voices. You know, like Pot Pie is a great example of like Brandon's original voice and fun personality, and you like to make friends and you're hilarious. So like that show is that. It's not just a cooking show that we tack Brandon onto.
And I also like to say, you know, people when they started, they're like, how are you going to destigmatize cannabis consumers using content? You don't. And so I think to be candid, like if your goal is to destigmatize, you're probably not going to create great content. If your goal is, I want to create great content and show how cool these people are, or how, and know who their audience is, you know, other disc golf players, and trying to get new people into the sport, then you will by nature destigmatize some of the stereotypes potentially, right? So finding, I think to echo Jesse, like who are these leaders? You know, sometimes you might have someone with 500,000 followers and they're like, you know, a UFC champ, to make a parallel, but they're terrible on camera. And then you have the new guy, Derek, who's the guy that just the champ, and he got on stage, and the first thing he said was, why are you taking your pants off? He goes, because my balls are sweaty. And just like that, he got like 100,000 Instagram fans, and he became famous. And he's like, I mean, people know who he was if you followed the sport, but he just crossed over just in a post-fight interview, and now he's like this big thing that people are rooting for, and they buy into his story, and he's got this crazy personality, and so now he's kind of, you know, and then if you look at his Instagram, he's consistent. So anyways, I would say that's it could be a model to follow.
I would follow up with finding out who the influencer or the talent is in your space. It goes back to the authenticity. You know, who really is portraying the brand attributes of the sport, who are really into smoking marijuana or cannabis. You know, if those things are aligning naturally, then it's probably a good fit. But you know, if they're not, you should really be thinking about, is this going to be the right thing to cross over?
Make a pipe out of a Frisbee, have someone light it, pass it, and smoke it, and there's your 1 million views, and you can give me residuals later. Any other questions? Or?
In regards to this new atmosphere, what's the average budget for marketing right now for a startup?
Sad. Very, very sad. No, I'm kidding. It's low. I mean, look, we're all entrepreneurs, and that's the thing. It's, you know, when we enter the space and we work with cannabis brands, we understand the limitations. You know, we can't, you know, you can't approach a cannabis brand expecting them to have a 6-figure budget for an advertisement that they don't even know where to run. So, you know, we're used to dealing with brands who have $2,500 here, $5,000 there, $10,000 there, and it means something to them. It's meaningful. They need to know that's going to that, you know, it's going to generate ROI. At the same time, you know, you can't really build your company off of revenue and profits, right? I mean, it's very difficult. The idea that you're going to launch a brand and that you're just going to start making money and then you're going to reinvest that money without ever raising money it's just a very dangerous, challenging way to start a business. You absolutely need to raise capital if you want to have a successful business, period. I mean, you know, you hear about the person in their garage who magically, you know, Dell computer, and they don't tell you, he still raised $10 million to do his business. You know, I mean, there was a tipping point where he needed capital. So having a plan, knowing when you need to start spending money on marketing and how to spend it is going to be an important part of that.
I get that. What's the budget? Based on your experience, what's the average budget for startup?
One time, like for one thing, or for a year, or for a quarter, or?
You're the advisor. I mean, you got brand guys come in.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you got 35% of the
Mm-hmm.
for spending. What's the average?
Well, why don't you tell, what was your budget for, what percentage of your, what was your budget?
It's really expensive, right? Because I mean, for us, you know, we're working with co-packers, we're working with distro. So your margins with the consumer products, and then you sell it at wholesale price. So your margins are like pretty thin. So for us, you know, even when we started our like lifestyle brand, fashion brand, we didn't really spend a lot of money, but that was also because we were not funded. And then now that we're funded, we're thinking about probably around 10% of like our cannabis venture budget. We're gonna spend that 10% into marketing. But you know, that's a little low because that 10% is mostly going for activations and for point of sale marketing. Because the content we're gonna make from our fashion marketing budget.
I mean, if you look at it to scale, not from the startup side, you're going to end up spending at least 35% of your budget on marketing eventually. You know, when you can afford to do that, that's just part of your life cycle. There's no answer. There's no like, boom, you raise $100,000, you spend 35 grand. If you raise $100,000 and you spend 35 grand in marketing, you're probably going to be broke. If you raise $3 million, you probably won't spend. You know, you may spend $350,000 on marketing and awareness.
I think it comes down to the product. It comes down to knowing who your consumer is. I think there's a lot of questions that need to be asked first. The good news about content creation is that the barrier to entry is really becoming more accessible than ever before. As a straight content creator, it's never been a better time. You know, iPhone X, Final Cut Pro, filmmakers coming out of film school have the chops. So, you know, the good old days of, you know, multi-million-dollar commercials, they're still happening, but there's a lot more content being made at a lot lower price point than ever before. So that's definitely going to work in your advantage.
Any other questions? Nothing. Going once. Going twice.
420.
Yes, sir. Oh, I knew it. Yes, you, sir.
So you've been talking a lot about content for B2C, but I know that you guys also work in the B2B space.
Yep.
What's working there?
So you have multiple, like you have tech B2B, right? You have product B2B. What we're seeing right now, a lot of, candidly, is investor relations content. So obviously everyone here is aware of the sort of green rush in Canada and publicly traded companies. And so that is massively content driven, investor relations and the ability to create stories for your investors. So we're seeing a lot of that. You know, sizzles for trade booths, those sort of things. Again, there's not one step, but I would say if you're a tech company who's trying to reach dispensary owners to use your POS system, you know, versus your tech company that's making cartridges for third-party battery. You know, I mean, there's just so many things. But yeah, B2B tends to be a little more educational, a little more sort of like very straightforward. It has a different ROI. It comes out of a different budget level, but it's needed for sure. And that's what Gary specializes in.
It's still so strong on story and brand though. Like I think it's the same. Like whether you're making a B2B or B2C, it's like it should be telling the same story.
Brand attributes.
At its heart.
What
Right?
are your brand attributes? What are you getting across? What do you want your customers to know?
420, guys?
I think it is.
Oh, sorry. That's why no one's asking questions. I get it now. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate your time. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.